Thank you for joining us on our latest installment of our Artist Talk series. Today we sat down with Nancy Dillen, who is featured in our Mélange exhibit alongside Terrie Corbett and Grace Leal. Working in Florida, Nancy Dillen creates work from the real and imaginary. Her oil paintings address her concerns by placing symbols found in the local environment along with real or invented characters that inhabit her whimsical make believe world against the intense color and open space of Florida and other places she's traveled. Through her vocabulary of symbols, she makes a statement on contemporary society. The works shown and discussed in this video are available for purchase both in the gallery and online at www.venviartgallery.com. And with that, we hope you enjoy. Hello, Nancy. Thank you for joining us. I hope
Thank
all is
you.
well.
Thank you. Everything's fine down here. Yeah.
Awesome. So, to start, Melange was our latest exhibit up on the gallery space. And can you give us some insight on the meaning of the show and also how the show title may have affected your choice of pieces for the show and may have influenced what you included and what you excluded?
Okay. Well, melange means a hodgepodge, basically a mixture of all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so, since each of us had completely different types of artwork, I think Terrie had more abstract artwork. Grace Leal had more three-dimensional bas-relief type work and encaustic. And then mine is more realistic type, but imaginary realism. We thought that melange might just sum it all up. It sort of covers the whole base. The work I ended up putting in was predominantly work that I have not shown in a long time. It shows a series of the different stages of development I've gone through over the last many years. Just goes through all the different stages that I've created, because I've created at least 5 or 6 different series, and I work in series, and sometimes I'll pop back and forth into the same series I used to develop, but most of the time I'll focus on one thing for a period of time and then I'll go to something else. It's fun to just see how far you can take that topic and see how far it'll go.
Definitely. And so, regarding your subject matters, what influences your subject matter?
Well, since so many of them deal with the environment, that does make a big difference. And in general, I started the different series when I started going up to take classes in the summertime. First of all, I was a teacher for 35 years at Brevard Community College, which is now Eastern Florida State College in Melbourne. And I was the program coordinator and art instructor, and the only one that was really full-time on the campus that I was stationed. So a lot of the things that I did were inspired by trips that I took, but most of the time it was inspired by what I experienced when I went up to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and took classes every summer for over 20 years at Aramont School of Arts and Crafts. And there I was exposed to outstanding teachers from all over the world, as well as students with such a diverse background from as young as 16 years old.
Wow.
And much, much older, up into their 80s, I would say.
Nice. Oh,
so,
that's nice.
It was a good experience. And plus, I usually would go up and take 2 classes. And one was usually a 1-week class and the other was a 2-week class. And I started off taking, the first year I went up there, I started off taking a class in plein air painting. And the teacher was Leonard Kozianski. In that time, he was just about the same age as I was. And he was doing very well internationally with his work. And he was teaching at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And they, as part of their contract, they had to teach at Aramont. So Leonard took us out every day for 2 weeks, and we would do plein air painting.
Nice.
And I tell you what, it was the most frustrating thing I ever did. But I loved being out in nature.
Yeah.
And I kept for a number of years, I would go back and take the same basic subject. If it wasn't from him, it was from some other teacher that was teaching plein air, or I would, instead of doing oils, I would do pastels. At the end of the 2-week session, we had a critique, as most classes do, just to wrap up all the things that we've learned. And so he told everybody that was there, if you're planning on coming back to Aramont again, don't, unless you do something with art every day of the year between now and next year. And by that, you're either going to read something about art, you're going to do sketching, you're going to paint or draw or actually create a product. And as a teacher, I figured I'm doing something about art every day that I'm teaching. Plus, on the weekends, I would spend the weekends trying to develop ideas for the paintings that I would eventually create. And a lot of times, because as a teacher, you just don't have time to spend any large body of time during the weekdays, I would wait for the weekend to do the studies. And then over the holidays, like Thanksgiving or Christmas or summer break, I would create the paintings. So I had been doing predominantly oil painting before that, and I had been doing alla prima. And that's what I ended up doing with this plein air painting. And I would go out. I decided to go out every day in the summer until my classes started, and I'd do plein air. Wow. So that was a real learning experience to do that locally, whereas before at the class, there was a whole group of people that was going out. So you felt a sense of security because you were in numbers. When you went out by yourself, you never knew who was going to approach you. And that was always a concern.
Definitely.
But one day, I was trying to figure out where I was going to go. And I mentioned it to my husband, and he said, well, there's a neat spot over on the beaches that where there's a little bit of construction going on, but there's interesting buildings, and it's close to the beach, and you might find something of interest there. So I went over there and I set up just outside my car, and I noticed that there was not far from me a stoplight, and near it there were a bunch of traffic cones, and there was a hole that was being dug. So I thought about that. I started sketching it because it's something different, and I decided that when I got back to the house that I might continue doing that idea of something with barriers, some kind of road barriers or construction. And the idea was cemented when this was over Christmas weekend or holidays, and a couple that was very close to us, one of the wife was a teacher at the college with me, an English teacher, very well renowned. She and her husband and a guest were in a car and traveling through from the beaches to the mainland, and they were sideswiped by a car, and she got the worst end of the hit. She ended up with broken legs, broken ribs, arms, all kinds, and a head concussion. And so she was she was unconscious for at least 3 months, a really long time. But when she came back, she was okay, but she had short-term memory. But during that time, when I heard about the accident, I had started working on this painting, this one painting. It's now called Society's Barriers. And that, when I was looking at it, I was thinking about all of the things that were in the painting and all what had happened to her. And it made me realize that barriers were important, and it should be a theme that I tried to develop. So, because not only is it the changes that are taking place in the environment. But as a teacher, I was always forced to encounter my students that had questions about what they should do for a career. They wanted to do something in art, but their parents did not want them to do something in art.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure as an artist, you probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so I would tell them, you're the one that's got to live with your decision. So if you want to take classes in art. But you can, whether you end up doing something with it in a professional manner or not, is not important. What's important is that you're developing an appreciation for art, and artists always need appreciators because sooner or later they might buy a piece of your work. Yeah. And so that was my standard comment. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've had a number of people go on and become professional artists, and a number of people have definitely enjoyed being the appreciators and collectors of art.
Yeah, so definitely.
That was how one of the themes got started. Mm-hmm. And I would take the ideas or the compositions that I'd created back up to Aramont the next year, and I would show them to the teachers because they always asked to see some examples of your work. So I showed them the slides, and I appreciated their comments because I was there to learn and grow. And so most of the things that they said was it was too literal. You had stop signs, road barriers, these cones, sawhorses, that type of thing. And so they said, start looking for the non-literal barriers. So I started looking at the landscape itself. Mm-hmm. And I did a number of paintings that included branches that had fallen across my path, or vines, or other things like that. Yeah. And so animals eventually started creeping into my composition. And I did a painting that was called Bubba's Woods. And it was inspired by a pastel drawing that I'd done in the Smokies the year prior to being up there. And I decided that the pastel was too good not to use that subject matter. So I was just going to use a straight literal interpretation of it, but my husband is my best challenger. He said, "Oh, you can do something better than that." So it made me start looking around for what I could add to it. So I had gotten a book when I was at Aramont the year before that was a Dover book that was copyright free, had images that were copyright free. And so I found a wild boar. And I had recently seen a documentary on television mm-hmm. that dealt with the challenges and the problems that the wild boars were creating to those people that lived in the Smokies mm-hmm. and wherever they did live, because they would tear up the environment. They would root and cause erosion to occur, and it was affecting their environment and their living experiences. Mm-hmm. So I decided to put that wild boar in my painting, and it met with a lot of appreciation, and it was eventually awarded. I think it was American Artist Magazine. I had included it in a national competition that dealt with in the environment, and it was given first place.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah, so and I got a picture in the magazine and all kinds of stuff. So that was really neat. So I continued to use the environments that I had pictures from the environments I had taken up in the Smokies. Mm-hmm. So that I continue to go back to them, whether I put animals in them or not. Just the environment itself has a inspirational feeling to it. There's something about where you can meditate, where you can just hear the animals in their natural environment. Yeah. Whether you're in the middle of drawing, you hear something slithering next to you, or you happen to look up the tree and there's a snake. You just don't know what you're going to encounter.
Oh yeah.
I've always enjoyed going to Aramont and taking classes where I was able to go outside.
Mm-hmm.
So I was eventually asked to come up and teach an elder hostel during the spring term when I should have been at BCC teaching. And anyway, I got into a little bit of trouble, but that started the whole sequence of being asked almost every other year to come up to Gatlinburg and teach. So I've taught up there at least 12 times, and I'm supposed to teach there in the last weekend in October and the first week of November this year.
Oh,
and teach a
awesome.
drawing class. So if you know anybody that's interested in taking a drawing class and would like an opportunity to get away from home and go up to the mountains, come join my class. I would love to have you. Okay.
That's great. Yeah.
So where I get my subject matter when it deals with the landscape.
Definitely.
Now, I've traveled, so wherever I go, I try to take pictures. And when I come back, I'll look at them and I will determine what I'm going to do with them. So one of the other series that I have developed is a fruit and vegetable landscape series.
Love those, yes.
One day, a friend of ours, brought a bag of turnips. Okay. Well, growing up in the South, turnip greens were something that we had fairly regularly in the summertime whenever we could get them from the farmers, but we never got the root.
Mm-hmm.
And so this person had grown up on a farm in Virginia, and he'd gotten some turnips because he knew I loved turnips. But I never had seen the root. So when I got it, I said, I've got to do something with this root because it was a beautiful white and purple color in conjunction with the greens with it. So anyway, one morning, you know how you do when you're just on the cusp of waking up, you end up coming up with an idea. I did. I came up with a composition basically for my painting called Turn Up. And I did some sketches of it, but it just still was incomplete. So my husband said something to me, you might want to introduce a bird to it. Remember the terns that we saw, TERN, that we saw when we were up in the Outer Banks of North Carolina? And I said, yeah. I said, why don't you go check out a book of the library and see if you can find a tern? So I found some terns and I brought them back, and I incorporated a picture of a tern in the painting. And that got me started on the fruit and vegetable landscape series. So we later on went out to Yosemite, and I came back with pictures from that, and I incorporated other fruit and vegetables in it. Yeah. And then we went over to DeLand, and there's a place called Dahoon Island, and we went up to on the top of a fire tower, and I took a picture from there, and that inspired another. So this is how I come up with these composition. I start thinking about, well, how can I put fruit and vegetables in place of the natural foliage?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how that evolved.
Very cool. One of our next questions is asking where you got the idea of combining the real and the imaginary in your work. Would you say this series was kind of that?
Definitely. Yeah.
That starter. Yeah.
Right. Because, I have a sign over my easel that says, do the unexpected. Oh. And as a teacher, I always tried to encourage the students to do something that was unique.
Yeah.
They needed to find out who they were and what was that they really liked to do. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I put on my easel to challenge me as well. Mm-hmm. So the painting that's behind you, is behind me.
Oh,
at
yeah.
least behind me, not you,
Yeah.
behind me, is one of the woodchuck series.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the woodchuck series was again developed when I was up in Gatlinburg.
Yeah.
And we'd gone out to Cage Cove and I'd taken some pictures. But when I was walking around, one of the buildings that went into was a gift shop, and they had postcards, and one of them had a woodchuck on it. And so when I was out at Cage Cove, I'd see woodchucks pop up every once in a while. And so it reminded me of a story my husband had told me. And he was born in Pennsylvania on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was a little child, say 3 or 4 years old, he was out wandering around on the farm in a field. And he ran into a woodchuck who was just standing there, mesmerized by the sun, I guess in a daze, oblivious to the fact that Rick was there. And I guess once the woodchuck realized he had a visitor,
Yeah.
like it, and he challenged Rick, and so he got scared and ran. Okay, which is normal. So, but I always like that story, whether it's a real interpretation of what he said or not. That's my interpretation of it.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so I found this postcard and I sent it home to him. Said, "Do not throw this postcard away," because I wanted to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that started me on a series of woodchuck paintings, which I call the underdog painting. He lives underground, but he's also not considered to be the most desirable critter to inhabit your farm landscape because of what the holes do to animals. But and plus they eat the roots off the crops. But anyway, that's where the woodchuck series came from.
Yeah.
And the piece that's behind me was inspired by a trip to some friends up in New York State, and they lived on a farm. They had a farm. There were barrels, these yellow barrels, sitting up in this empty farm and field. And so I took a picture of that, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do that field, and where the barrels are or thereabouts, I'm going to put woodchucks.
Oh.
And so now it's called Chuck-Takwa, the community gathering that took place predominantly back in the turn of the century, when people would get together to have religious meetings or talk about politics or other types of community issues. So that's where it came from. So they're gathered together to have a meeting.
Yeah, discuss their important woodchuck business.
That's right. That's right.
Awesome. And so the woodchucks, and the boar you mentioned, previously, you mentioned how the boar kind of was used as like a symbol for barriers, for borders and stuff. So do other objects and animals in your work hold certain meanings and symbolize certain topics? Are they used as storytellers or signifiers throughout your pieces?
Well, to me, it just adds another element. Instead of putting a person in it, I can put an animal in it, and the things the way they're looking, the way they are placed, it could symbolize something special about the environment, because a lot of the times they're there to educate the public about what's happening in the environment. There's one I have that's called Urban Chucks. And it had about 3 or 4 woodchucks in the foreground, and behind them you could see a series of houses that were being constructed.
Yeah.
And so the question is, who's taking over? You know, is the public now, humans now moving into their environment, or are the woodchucks going to move into their houses? So, what are they going to do? They're discussing again what's coming and going.
Another
so then there's another one called Tree Trail that it was inspired by a trip out to the Tetons and a river that had branches going across it. Well, I put woodchucks on top of it because it was like a bridge.
Yeah.
Bridge from one side of one known thing to another.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always change. Life is change. And you have to go across bridges. You have to make bridges to create new experiences.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Moving on to our second question, which we kind of touched on, but not second question, next question, sorry. Can you elaborate on the vegetable and fruit motifs in your work? We talked about the turnip, and would you like to talk about any other motifs? Maybe the teapots, the fruit teapots we had in the gallery?
Okay, well, with the teapots, the reason why I created them was because, again, I was doing the teapot, I was doing the fruit and vegetable landscapes, but a friend came over to the house and we were talking about a series of ceramic teapots that had been created and some of the ones that I'd seen up at Aramont.
Uh-huh.
And this fellow said he knew that at another location where he used to be the museum director, he had customer clients come in and say they'd buy anything that dealt with a teapot.
Oh.
So I said, okay, I'll do paintings of teapots. And so I decided to think of salads and the salad subject matter that goes into the salad. And so I had Waldorf teapot, a Waldorf salad teapot. I think I had the fruit and vegetable teapot and mixed vegetable teapot or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So those were some of the salads that I came up with in some of the pots. So.
Oh, that's awesome. And with your subject matter, has living in Florida altered or shaped or created something new for you when working?
I grew up in Quincy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the rural environment that I lived in, one of the things that we tended to do on a regular basis with my family, my father was he's a manager of a packing house, a tobacco packing house. And so usually he's on the weekend, on Sundays, when we get together with my grandmother, we would go for a ride in the country. And usually seeing the rolling hills and the tobacco that had been planted or that whatever the crop happened to be that was growing in the fields, we would discuss it. But I'd get a chance to just look and appreciate what was around me. And so on Sundays, we would go driving through the fields, and the rolling hills and the beautiful landscape was what really was something that I would always take back with me, and I would remember that uniqueness about North Florida. And so for a number of years, I would try to do things that were reminiscent of my experiences growing up. And there was one thing that I did, which was a drawing, a colored pencil drawing that I did based on a photograph that was taken of me. It doesn't have anything to do about the fields, but it was taken of me when I was in kindergarten. And there were two other good friends sitting around the table, and we were drinking tea as if we were in a tea party. And so that memories of things like that, I would try to incorporate into my paintings. So I did that 2 times, once with woodchucks as well as with people. So anyway, that was one of the things I did.
Can we get a little insider information on your process? Maybe like a little step by step in how you choose your subjects and then go about.
Okay, I'll be glad to. Well, once I depend on a picture as a reference, and I might do sketches of that picture in some way, and take some part of the picture and blow it up. So once I've got the sketch figured out, and I know exactly what I'm going to do, I always stretch my own canvas and gesso it, and then I always start with a neutral background. I usually paint a thin coat of burnt sienna over the whole thing, very thin coat, using oils to do that. Sometimes I use acrylics, whichever one you have. It's easy to do. But mainly, I will say that since the mid 1990s, I have started working in a different manner than I did prior to that. Anything prior to that was alla prima, directly painting on canvas. After having gone to Italy and spent 2 weeks in Florence, I took a course in egg tempera. I'd always wanted to learn something about that. So after doing it, I came back. I really liked it. I came back and I did a few egg tempera paintings. And I realized that basically you didn't have to use egg tempera. The technique was basic for any medium. You just had to follow the steps. So basically you start off with this neutral background. I always do a vine charcoal drawing of my composition onto the canvas. And when I have drawn the composition out on my sketchbook, I usually put tick marks to divide it into the middle and the quarter zones.
Yeah.
And I create a grid on my canvas that matches that. And then I loosely, with vine charcoal, draw the outlines of the composition. And the more I have done, it's easier if I do a value study with the vine charcoal on the canvas. Then once I've finished it, I will spray it with workable fixative, usually a Cryoline workable fixative. And then I'll start with a color. And it doesn't matter to me what color it is, but usually I tend to go with either a dark blue or red. Okay, so let's just say I start with the blue. And it might be a phthalo blue red shade. Okay, and I will create I put the phthalo blue over it in a very thin value, a thin amount of paint with a mixture of turpentine or mineral spirits and paint. And I need to stop back and tell you some more things. Prior to about 1985, I was exposed to an artist whose name was Richard Sammons. And he introduced me to mixing my own paint from scratch.
Yeah.
And so I used, since 1985, I've been using raw pigment, and I add a little bit of burnt plate oil to it. So what is burnt plate oil? Burnt plate oil is the binder for etching ink. Okay, so it's an oil-based ink. It's an oil-based medium. So therefore, you have to thin it with mineral spirits or turpentine. And so the thing I found out was if you cannot work really well in pasto, it's best to work very thin in lots and lots and lots of layers. So that's when the egg tempera technique was exposed to me, I realized, oh, that makes it so much easier. I can build up all these thin layers to start with, and then adding the thicker layers as I build on top of it until I feel like I've got what I want. Okay, so knowing that, I will mix a little bit of the phthalo blue red shade on my glass palette, and I put a little dollop of burnt plate oil on it, mix it together. And then after I have created the one color, then I will add white to it, so it becomes a grisaille, okay, gray tone. And then I let it dry. Usually, since it's thinned with mineral spirits or turpentine, it doesn't take long to dry. And so then I will come back on top of it with a glaze. And the glaze could be a red glaze, and a thin wash of that. But then now, since I have been working, you always work from thin to thick with oils. Now I add a little bit of liquid. I have a jar of it. Here it is. Can you see it? There, well, sort of, kind of.
Yeah.
Liquid is there. So liquid. So it's a resin-based medium that causes the paint to dry faster.
Oh.
So within 24 hours or less, a layer of paint will be dry.
Nice.
So now I can go back on top of the red glaze with lighter values of red, building up the red and the blue combination. So you know that when you put red on top of blue, it's going to turn the blue into a purple, a dark purple. Wherever the light blue is, it's going to turn it into a light lavender. Okay, so you keep working that up. And if you put white into an area, then it's going to stay white. So the next color that you put on top of that, let's say, will be yellow. So I'm working with the 3 primary colors. And so you put a glaze of yellow over top of everything. Then you start working with the lighter values of yellow, until you have the whole thing painted with all 3 primary colors. So I never know exactly what it's going to look like when it's finished, but I like to see what is going to be created. Sometimes I'll stop after 2 applications of glazes, or sometimes I'll go with all 3. And if I'm not happy after all 3, then I might come in with a 4th color. Usually I don't glaze it. I'll just add the color to it and work in a value scale of that color. So once it's finished, I will let it dry for 3 to 6 months. And then I will apply Krylon Kmar varnish onto it, so that it ends up having an overall even sheen. And that seals it. So that's basically how I work.
Wow.
So it's labor intensive, but what's neat about it is you don't know what's happening, what the next color is going to come up and be.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So, and that's the way the old masters used to do it. So, you go back to frescoes. It's using the egg temper technique.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. I don't know. I love labor intensive practices. I think it really shows the love in what you're making through all the processes. So hearing everything that goes into your paintings is incredible. Wow.
Well, I love detail. I can't get enough detail, but then I think, why am I putting myself through this torture? But it's really not that torture. It's usually a neat discovery that you're creating. And you can decide when to stop and when not to.
So to finish up, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to share? Any advice you'd like to give for aspiring artists? Anything you'd like to end us with?
Well, the important thing is just to do. If you want to go into art, or just having a chance to expose yourself to art, do it. Find a class and do as much as you can, and explore as many different art mediums as you can before finalizing what you're going to do. Found that those people that are stuck on one thing when they get out of high school limit themselves so drastically that they're probably not going to be successful at what they do, because they have not explored the rich range of things that can be done. And with contemporary art, there's so many different medias out there now that you have to know a little bit about it all. And I do use computer graphics. I have gotten into working with a program similar to Photoshop, and I develop my own designs now. And what I'm doing now more than the painting is drawing. And the drawing series, if you go to my website, is completely different. Whereas before, the landscape environment was important. Now they're all icons. They're more like portraits
Okay.
of these imaginary characters.
Ooh.
So,
We'll definitely check out your website.
all right.
That's
Well,
awesome.
thank you. So I think that's about it.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for allowing us to have your work on display. It was an incredible show, and we can't wait for the next.
Okay, well, thank you.